we can approach God at any time freely, and he wants to hear us, and he will hear us. Yo, what is going on, students? It has been quite some time since we've been here with you guys. We're excited to be back. Man, to my right is one of my good friends, Jamie. Jamie has been, you know this already, Jamie's been in student ministry for a long time. This is what we call a seasoned vet. And so he's with you tonight. Jamie leads over at our North Campus. And so if you're from the North Campus and you're watching this, send him some love. Send him a hate text if you need to. I don't know what you got to do to get off your chest. We'll link his number in the description for you to send that over. And to my left over here is one of my good friends. And tonight we're going to call him J Money, like usual. Ooh. And hey, John does a lot for our South Fork campus, man. John is what we call A1 up in the production booth upstairs. He does a lot of making sure our Sunday morning program happens smoothly, and John helps in our student ministry, and John helps on these videos. So, man, we're thankful for what John does. A lot of the South Fork crew knows this man really well. But hey, tonight we're back, and look, we're back for good. We're excited to be bringing you kind of our first ever official series, like student ministry series. I guess we've done like one-off random videos before, but we're doing some seasons. So this is season 1. I'm just gonna drop season 1. Maybe we'll throw some confetti sound effects in the background. I don't know, but we're excited about what we're doing tonight, man. Season 1, we're talking all about your personal connection with God and other people, right? So part of our vision for this school year, we're talking through what it looks like to love God and love others. And we know that a big component of that is making sure that it's real and personal to us. And so we've got to know God. We've got to be connected to God. And I think out of that, we'll have better interactions and relationships and friendships with other people around us. So with that being said, Jamie, you want to just kind of let the people know, what are we talking about tonight? What's going on? Why are we here for episode 1?
Yeah, so I want to immediately say, how funny is it that you're sitting here giving this serious introduction, and me and John are just on your sides, just like cracking up, having fun.
Cheesing it up, man.
That feels exactly what I would expect. But man, tonight we are going to hit the topic prayer, because when we're thinking about, man, we want to love God and we want to love others and we want to know God, because you can't love something you don't know. And so when we're thinking about that, we were like, you know what? We need to talk about prayer, because here's what I believe. I believe that everyone has an idea of prayer. I believe that everyone thinks that they know that they should be praying, right? Every Christian thinks and knows that they should be praying, but what I think happens is we don't do it, or we don't know how to do it, or we just start throwing up those Hail Mary prayers at the very end of right before a test, and doesn't always come through. So we sat down and we said, you know what, we want to talk about prayer. So I'm excited to jump into that.
Yeah, and so like I think let's not waste time. Let's get right into it. Like the first thing I want us to talk about is like, what is prayer? And how does it work, right? I believe that there's some students watching tonight who they might know a general answer of what prayer is and how it works, but man, I'd be willing to bet there's some of you watching right now and you're like, dude, I don't know what prayer is. I definitely don't know how it works. And so I think that sometimes we have misconceptions of what prayer really is. One of my biggest hangups, like with prayer, has always been like it doesn't feel like the conversations we're used to, right? Like we're sitting here right now talking to one another. I'm looking at John. I'm looking at Jamie.
You hear the feedback when we're like,
that's you're responding. And prayer doesn't feel like that. And so that's a hard thing for me when it comes to prayer. I think that can be one of the biggest roadblocks and obstacles. John, for you, like personally, is there anything in your life where you're like, this is why prayer is hard for me?
Yeah. For me, like prayer for the longest time always looked like basically God in a genie bottle, right? Like he's just my genie, and like anytime I need something, I'll just be like, hey God, like here's a prayer. And it was just like, he was my go-to man. Yeah. just rub that lamp and he'll come out. And so for me, like it was learning that prayer is communicating with God. It is a literal direct line to God. Through his word and through prayer, and like to sit down and to reflect on what he has already said in his word. One thing that's so significant to me about prayer, as we were kind of like coming up with this idea of what is prayer, I thought it was so significant that prayer is actually mentioned 500 to 700 times in the Bible, depending
Somebody
on.
fact check that.
Yeah,
Wait.
fact check that.
Did you did you say 5 to 7 or did you say 500 to 700?
500.
I just wanted to make sure
either
people
way,
heard that right.
It's
Yeah,
still
That's a
500
lot of times.
700 times.
Yeah.
Depending on the version that you're reading.
Is that a lot of times?
I would imagine.
Hey,
I think that's a lot of times.
it's more than 10, so it's a lot of times.
It's more than one per day if you're going to read one per day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
I mean, and to me, that just shows like how important prayer is
Yeah.
and how it is an actual conversation with God.
Yeah.
A lot of times you'll see Moses and all these people throughout the Bible talking to God. That's prayer.
That's important.
Yeah.
Like they're talking to God. So for me, it was just learning that prayer is communicating with God directly.
Yeah, John, I think I was snooping in your notes earlier, and I did I see that you have 1 John 5 pulled
Yes,
up?
sir.
Do you want
Yes,
to
sir.
read that for the people
Yeah,
real
I've
quick?
got it copied.
Yeah, so
Paste it,
so this
dude.
is like
Let's go.
this is a
Beautiful.
This is a major reason for prayer. What John's about to read here.
Yeah. So 1 John 5:14 through 15. This is NIV. This is what it says. This is the confidence we have in approaching God, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And that if we know that he hears us, whatever we ask, we know that that we have what we asked of him. So that can sound kind of confusing. So Michael, what do you make of that verse? What do you make of those two verses?
I love it. Yeah. So, when I hear something like that, right there, what that tells us about prayer. And if you're wondering like, hey, what is prayer? I mean, you kind of said it before, you said prayer is our way of communicating with God, right? Yeah. But what's cool about that verse specifically in 1 John 5 is that it's saying that, hey, whatever we ask, it's heard, and man, I don't know about you guys, but like there's people in my life who, man, my phone is always on for them. There are people in my life, and this is no offense to them, but like if you call me at 2 a.m, I won't get your call, right? Like I don't always hear you coming through. Now,
I'm gonna keep trying
what's
keep
cool
calling.
about this is that it says, hey, like God is always available to hear our prayers. But the interesting thing there is it says it has to be according to his will.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting, like that's a word where we hear that and we're like, okay, well, does that restrict what I need to pray?
Yeah.
And I'd say, hey, not necessarily. Here's what we're really trying to get you to see. Prayer is our way of kind of reconvening with God, right? Like once we've been in his word, once we've been in community with other Christ followers around us, once we kind of have this heart for God, prayer is our way of kind of pouring that back into God and saying, all right, God, here I am. Here's my thoughts. Here's my ideas. But when something means a lot to you, it's kind of going to flow and it's going to change the way and the reason you do some things. And so it's kind of saying like, hey, if you're serious about God, like when you have this relationship with God, your prayer is kind of going to reflect that in some ways, and God's always going to hear you.
Yeah.
Jamie, does that make sense? Do you need to clarify that in any way? I don't want to make sure we're getting this to the students here.
I think that makes perfect sense. One thing that I think about with prayer, there's a verse in Jeremiah that talks about how if we ask or if we seek or we knock, sorry, that's not Jeremiah, that's Matthew. That's in the Sermon on the Mount. He said if we ask, if we seek, if we knock, that God will open the door, he will answer, that he will be there with us. It's the idea of we should be going to God, and that when we are praying, when we are talking to him, that he is there and he is with us. Talking about prayer, one thing that always interests me is, we talked about what is prayer. It's connecting with God or being with him. It's our direct connection. Something that I always find really interesting is this is something that's actually new, prayer. Before Jesus, before he came and died, people couldn't just stop and say, God, I need your help. They couldn't just stop and pray. They would have to go, and you can read about it if you want to get crazy. You can go Old Testament and you can read about all the different sacrifices that they made, but they would have to go to the temple, present a sacrifice, and all that would have to be done before they could talk to God. Where now today we can pray and actively go to God through his son, through his death, and because of that, it allowed us to connect with him to the point where in like 1 Thessalonians 5, Paul, writing his final instructions for this church, said in verse 17, constantly pray. So people went from not being able to connect with God until there was a sacrifice to now we are told constantly pray, because we can now always connect with him. And so I think that's such a cool thing when we're talking about that. It's the fact that, man, we can go to him at any point and he hears us at any point. Whether we're in the lowest time of our life or we're at the mountaintop, he's there. He hears us. We ask, we seek, we knock. He answers the door.
Oh man, that's
so
that's
good.
good, dude. And so yeah, like if we're asking ourselves, hey, what the heck is prayer? How does it work? Man, you just heard
Yeah.
it there. Both of those have been answered. Prayer is a way for us to communicate with
Yeah.
God so that we can align ourselves with God. And then that second piece there is, hey, how does prayer work? Well, hey, it works through the sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross for us. And now we can freely at any time approach God.
Yeah.
Right? The misconception I always had growing up, like, you know, you're in Sunday school, and so maybe he only hears the Sunday school teacher's prayers. Or like, do I have to pray before every meal? Is that like the ticket to making sure God hears me?
Absolutely.
Can it
If the food's not blessed.
yeah. Like, you know, or like,
McDonald's isn't blessed.
can I only
Chick-fil-A.
pray when something is really pressing? You know, we have all these questions about prayer, and it's just important for us to realize, like, no, we can approach God at any time freely, and he wants to hear us, and he will hear us.
Yeah, I think right before we transition on, you talk about that. I think about a story Casey told me. There's a girl that works in her lab that's pretty far from God. She knows who God is, like has some of the knowledge, not a believer. And she come up and asked Casey to pray for her. And she was like, because you have that direct connection with God. She's like, if I pray, like, I don't have that connection, but you. And then she's like, well, have your husband. He's a pastor. Have him pray because he has the real connection.
Yeah.
And we think about that. And that's not what prayer is.
Yeah.
It's not pray only if you're super connected with God and you work at the church. It's pray. God hears your prayer.
Yeah.
So I you know.
To add on to that real quick too, is like, that's the whole point of the sacrifice, right?
Yeah.
Is to have that direct relationship. So like the point of prayer is to grow that relationship with God.
Yeah.
Because he wants you to have that direct line, to come to the Father and to tell him your problems, to come with whatever you have on your heart, to lay it before him. I mean, he already knows, but he wants to see that. He wants to hear that from you.
Yeah.
So I think that's a beautiful thing. And yeah, I mean, prayer is supposed to make us look more like Jesus, right? I mean, Jesus prayed all the time.
Yeah.
And so it's that thing of like, well, if I'm following Jesus, I should probably follow what he did too. And he prayed a lot. So yeah.
Yeah, it's another marker of it for me that lets me know it's important, right? You know, students watching, you're like, well, okay, I kind of get what prayer is, but like, do I have to do it? You know, and man, Jesus, like, if there was anybody who ever didn't have to pray, you'd assume it'd be him, right?
Right.
And honestly, like, I don't even know if he had to, but he did, and he prayed all the time.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a good bit of Jesus's life that's written about in the New Testament. Maybe even not as much as we'd hope. And there's more than one instance where Jesus goes away to pray to the Father. And so if we're like, hey, do I have to pray? I mean, yeah, I'd say it's a huge component of what we need to do, because man, if Jesus needed to be connected to God, his Father, I mean, how much more do we? Right. So I think another thing I think about with prayer, and this is like, I mean, this is a good question. Like, how are we supposed to pray?
Yeah.
How are we supposed to do it? You know, like, I think sometimes we get it in our heads. There must be a magic formula. You know, if you know, some people will say, well, the Lord's Prayer is the way you got to do it, right? In Matthew. And, you know, I didn't grow up in a household where that was a thing, but I had friends who, when we prayed for dinner at their house, there was one prayer only, and it was the Lord's Prayer. And I'm not even saying that people are wrong for that by any means. But I do think that there's actually freedom in prayer a little bit. And when the disciples asked that to Jesus, they were simply just asking what we're asking right now. Lord Jesus, how are we to pray? Right? And so there's some things I've got listed on this doc, but we can talk through them. Like, I think there's some components the Lord's Prayer walks us through. It might not be an order, but there's definitely some things we need to be checking off. And so, what are some of y'all's favorite things from that list? Like when you pray, what are you looking to do? Like, I'll list it for you.
Yeah.
So it's worship and adoration. It's trust and belief. We can make our requests known to God through prayer. We can confess our sin to God through prayer, and we can practice submission to God through prayer. And so, like, from that list for you guys, like, what dominates your prayer life? What do you spend a lot of time? Maybe it's one more than other. I don't know.
You want
So I want to jump right away because you mentioned having friends that, like, at the dinner table they prayed the Lord's Prayer. I went to a public high school, not a Christian high school, not a private, public high school, on the wrestling team with a bunch of dudes that none of us were believers. And before every single match, at the end of our warm-up, we'd all come and we'd get in the middle of the mat and we would all recite the Lord's Prayer.
Dude.
None of us followed Jesus.
That's wild.
I always thought that was funny.
But that's a tradition of it, right?
It was a tradition. It was you know, every single wrestling team, we did that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we did that, though we were not believers. We knew the Lord's Prayer. But when I think about that list that you said, man, for me, my prayer life, I feel like, has had a lot of different shifts. Even in the last, like, couple months, my prayer life has had a lot of different shifts. So a while back when I was early on as a believer, it was very heavy dominated with requests of just me being like, God, I need you to do this in my life. God, I need you to turn this period in my bank account into a comma. Like, God, I need you to, I studied for 5 minutes, turn that 5 minutes into 5 hours of knowledge. Like, just constant requests of everything all the time. So where then I took this hard shift where I went from constantly just, God, I need this. God, I need this. God, you're a slot machine and I'm pulling it. Like, I need you to then I moved to a big confession where it was like every time I prayed, I felt like all I was doing was just praying my guts out. Of just confessing everything. Like, God, I stepped on a butterfly and that was your creation. Like, was I not supposed to? Like, confessing everything. And so now I feel like I'm at this stage where I'm almost moved again. I feel like as seasons, I ebb and flow in the different, where now I'm praying, my prayers have turned more into like submission type prayers where it's like, all right, God, I see what you have laid out for me. I'm starting to see, you know, the next couple steps in my life bring me to a place where I can accept that. And so my prayers have moved from a request to confession to now I've been very heavy submission and the idea of like, God, I need you to like make my heart what you want it to be. God, change me in this area so that I'm prepared for this moment. And so I feel like my prayer life has kind of shifted, but I'd love to hear John's take on that. I feel like John, he's such a man of God that his prayers have always been like rock solid and the same.
That would be my impression as well.
Dude, okay. All right. Well, let's just nip that in the bud real quick. I'll say this. The way I grew up was very heavy on the confession side of things. And so a lot of times I still find myself in that cycle where that's the biggest thing. It's just confession with a little bit of request. And then none other of the like the worship or adoration or the trust and belief or the submission. So I think that's something we can probably talk about here in a sec, but is being able to do all five, you know, the way that Jesus did in the Lord's Prayer. Maybe not recite the Lord's Prayer all the time, but just in our own way to hit on each of those things. But for me, it was confession. And now I've been working more on just like trying to praise him, you know, focus more on like Jesus instead of what I've done wrong all the time. Is focus on what Jesus did for me. And man, has that been a game changer for me and my mindset and being able to open the door to more requests, to more confession and to more submission. And so it's a game changer. So
Yeah. I feel like for me, you know, it is a seasonal thing. And we'll, like you said, we'll get to this in a second. We should really be, maybe not every prayer, but like, I believe a mature believer will try to weave these into their prayer life.
Yeah.
But I've really found myself lately really hammering on the trust and belief side of things. And people are like, whoa, youth pastor, struggling with trust and belief, you know? And I've been pretty candid and honest.
Bombshell for
you know,
episode 1.
There has been just a lot going on in my life that has really caused me to need to, and this sounds funny, but I've needed to lean on the Lord to like affirm and strengthen my faith in the Lord.
Yeah.
Sometimes people would be like, well, is that Does that make sense? Yeah, like you need to do that, right? If if you're struggling, you got to lean in. So, but for me, it's been, with family stuff that's happened and things in my life this past season, a lot of it has been, okay, like God, man, help me to know that you are still good and that you are still there. And man, give me this bit of encouragement from this direction that affirms this faith element that I've been struggling with or whatever it looks like. And man, that's been a really cool place. I've been able to even talk to some of my friends and let them know, people who've been in similar situations and say, hey, look, man, like it sounds weird. Like if you're struggling with faith and belief and trust, it sounds counterproductive to take that to God, who you might be having faith and trust problems with. But it has just shown me the supernatural love of God. As he said, man, Michael, like my child, thank you for taking that to me. And I see you and I love you. And here is now affirmed faith, right? And so, man, it's been crazy cool. But yeah, kind of as we're trying to put a bow on like, how do we pray? What's the formula? There isn't one, right? But I do believe that a mature follower of Christ, and I'm not saying that if you're not doing all of this, you're not a mature believer. I believe we're all maturing, but we need to make sure that there's parts of our prayers where, man, we're simply just saying, God, you are amazing. Like, God, I cannot believe that right now in my life, this is going well, or God, I cannot believe that I'm here breathing. There needs to be an aspect of that, or even just God, who you are astounds me. So there needs to be that element. There needs to be the trust and belief. I mean, we do need to lean on him when we have doubts. We've got to make our requests known to him because he wants to hear them, right? I mean, the Bible is very clear. Like even Jesus in the garden, as he's about to die on the cross, makes a request to God where he's like, God, I know what I have to do. Like Kylo Ren in Star Wars, he says,
I don't know if
he said,
I know what I have to do, but I just don't know if I have the strength to do it.
So Jesus is like
good.
in the
Spot
Garden of Gethsemane. Dude, I bet that was spot on. I can't wait to hear the audio for that. But like God wants to hear those requests from us. And then like confession, man, I'm always confessing. Like I really am. And so that might not be my favorite prayer, but it's a prayer that happens a lot. And then the prayer of submission, God, you are greater. I am less than. Help me to see that. And so like if you're asking how, there's 5 things, you could dedicate a finger to each little thing of prayer. I've seen that before. I don't know.
Write it down on a finger,
So that's just a helpful thing to let us know. Now,
Make sure you start with your
any closing thoughts on that before we kind of get towards the end of the video here?
For me, like prayer in my life, if you want to know what it looks like in my life, it's nothing crazy. It's just working like how I work. Like I'm all over the place all the time. So, I can make the excuse that I'm always busy, but there are always times where I can just like take a second and be like, God, like there's this issue going on. I'm super frustrated. Like I'm just going to give it to you and you're going to work it out. But God, I'm super frustrated right now. But then there's other times where like if I'm driving around, like picking up a part or something, I'm like, man, God, how amazing are you? Like to give me this beautiful day or to get me through that frustration yesterday. Like, so it's not always that I'm always hitting all 5 things in one prayer, but I'm making sure, like you said, was it 1 Timothy? Constantly pray, like always be in prayer. And so like taking the little bit of time to just throw up a prayer to him, and just be like, God, thank you for this. God, I have a friend who's struggling right now. I just want to take that to you right now. And just find that little time to do it. And then maybe even dedicate a little bit of time in the morning. Michael, you said this before in a message, like set a timer, start at like 2 minutes, pray, read a verse or 2, and then build on that and like work out that muscle, that spiritual muscle, and then get to a point where you're praying more and you're reading your Bible more. Because I mean, those 2 things kind of go hand in hand, but to also pray throughout the day, even if it's a 5-second prayer, 10-second prayer or something, just so your mind is right and you don't fall into temptation, whether it's frustration or anger or, somebody says something so you want to say something back, that kind of thing. So that's kind of what it looks like in my life.
Dude, I really want to quick hit on something you just said. Like, students, you need to hear this right now because he just said something valuable. I think one of my biggest obstacles to praying when I was young in my faith was I would just get so distracted while I was praying. Like I'd start praying and then I'd end up who knows where, right? Like my mind is now on I don't even know. Like something insane that is not what the prayer started as, And so, yeah, John, I love that. Like it's an exercise. You can't run a marathon on day one. You just can't. You got to build your way up to it. Same thing with prayer. I mean, really, like as you're figuring out what it looks like and how you can do it, I love that. Like set a 2.5-minute timer 4 times throughout the day. And then it's going to go off and that's going to be your time to pray and you're going to be your time to exercise that muscle. And over time, you'll see that grow. So I needed to say that because I love that. That was awesome.
That was from you. So that was awesome.
Jamie, I don't remember I ever said that. So that's great. Jamie, for you in your life, man, what does your prayer life look like? Is there an element that you'd like to highlight for students that could encourage them?
Yeah, something that I started doing about a year and a half ago is I started journaling my prayers. And so this took a lot of different forms. So I try to do what John was talking about where he was like, if I'm driving and like throw up a quick prayer if I know like I'm walking into a tough situation, like Lord, I need this a little bit. But I try to carve out time every day, usually in the morning, but sometimes you don't wake up on time or sometimes you're rushing and your prayer that was supposed to be at 7:30 in the morning turns into a 1 p.m. prayer or turns into a 7 p.m. prayer, right? So, life happens and you get busy. But I started to, on my main time of prayer, actually writing down my prayers. So like I'm not writing every single word that I'm praying. That would be crazy. But I'm taking just bullet points and I'm like, all right, here's the things that I'm praying for. Or here's the things that I'm very specific about asking for or bringing to God. And then that has transformed into a whole bunch of different ways in which I started journaling prayers. And that led me to what I'm doing now, which I'll have Michael throw a picture of what it looks like in the description where you guys can see it. But essentially my prayers now are broken into 6 different things.
Wow.
I'll just briefly, I don't want to take forever.
This guy's
on it.
organized.
Yeah, it's not that. But my prayers, so I always start my prayer time by writing down like what I'm grateful for or like praises, or if I prayed, did God answer this prayer from last week? Well, I'm going to celebrate him in that. Then we'll go and I'll start my next thing that I'm writing down is prayers for other people. Before I think about myself, I want to praise God for what he's done. And then I want to pray for others. And then I'm now asking personal prayers. So like, all right, God, I have this going on. This is where I need your help. This is what I need you to do. I then am praying about my time spent in his word where I'm studying. So if I read something and I found this application of I need to do this, I want to write down and I want to pray, God, help me to do what I just read in your word. I'm then moving, and something I've strived to do is to start memorizing the Bible. I think that's important. I've identified that as something that I need in my life. And so I'm now writing down, here's what I'm trying to memorize this week. And then I'm praying, God, help me to remember what I'm trying to memorize. The idea, pray that way I will not sin against you. I want to hide your word in my heart so I will not sin against you. That's Psalm 119. And then my last thing that I'm praying is I'm writing down a thing. It's called my non-negotiable of the day. So I believe that, our faith, Jesus didn't die just for our spiritual health. He died for all of it. He come for all of it. And so I believe that means our work, our personal life, our spiritual life are connected. And so I'm writing down, this is my non-negotiable for today. This is what I'm going to do, or what I have to do, or what I want to accomplish. And then I'm praying, God, give me the strength to do what I'm identifying as important. And so my prayer life has jumped all around, and you're hearing that and y'all are like, I will never be able to journal that. And that's fine. I'm going to have Michael put a picture of what it looks like.
I got you.
A little explanation of each one of those. But my challenge in saying all of that is, don't think that you have to do it as in depth as I'm doing it now, because I didn't start that way. I started by just taking a random notebook and going, bullet point, pray for Casey. Bullet point, I'm stressed out. Bullet point, I have a test coming up.
Yeah.
And then I sat down and I prayed. I was like, God, this is the things, and I was making sure that I was praying the things that I wrote down. And then as I got more and more into prayer, that's when I started to expand that list and started to try to break it down more. But my challenge is just write down a prayer.
Yeah.
You'll find that it helps you stay on, you'll stay on topic, because as soon as you start to wonder, you just open your eyes, be like, oh, this is the next thing, and start praying on it. But then also you'll find that if you do that long enough, you'll be able to look back and see, man, God answered this and God answered this. And I was praying about our nephew Malachi, and then I can look and say, wow, God answered that prayer. I was praying for this couple, and wow, God answered that prayer. And so it's just, that's something really, really simple, really easy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's neat, you just hear around the table, that each of us has things that really work for us in our prayer life, and maybe it's not journaling, maybe it's not whatever it is, each of us has a way where we know at the end of the day, this is how I'm going to be able to connect with God through prayer. Yep. And so I just say my heart for the students watching this is that they would realize and see that, they can start small, but I believe that as you continue to pray, right? Like we said, as you continue to it's just talking to God. Yep. It's just aligning yourself with him. It's making your requests known to him. And I believe as students continue to do that, they'll begin to even learn some of these things. All right, now what am I supposed to put in my prayer? I'm supposed to worship and confess, and I can ask things, and I can trust in God and all that. And then they'll begin to find the method. And so really, as we kind of wrap this up, man, if you're watching, I need you to just know, we've all got different things that work for us in our prayer lives. We do. And we've all got different methods. And so we found this really cool resource. Jamie and I and some of our leaders stumbled upon it about a year ago. Yeah. And it's this... I don't even know what it is. It's like a prayer resource guide. It's basically 10 different things that you can try to help boost your prayer life and strengthen your prayer life. Okay. I think spiritual journaling is on there.
I think so.
I mean, there's some super creative stuff on this list. There's like prayer walking, prayer through music. There's some pretty interesting resources on
ways,
here.
Yo, I'm gonna have to get that link.
Dude, we'll drop you the link
in the description.
John.
Is that when I can get it?
It will be in the description.
So you won't text me it. You'll just wait until the video comes out.
Yeah, I'm not gonna.
No.
Yep.
You don't get early access.
No. But hey, students, man, if you're watching, we just want you to know that if you are trying to grow in your personal relationship with God, the best way to start is just by talking to him, by aligning yourself with him, by realizing, man, here's what I really kind of should be focusing on in my prayers. And then even more so, here's how I can be praying. Here's what's going to work for me. Yeah. And so, look, I hope that if you tune in, you watch this to the very end, that this encouraged you and impacted you in one way or form. You can comment on the video. We'll be kind of keeping our eyes peeled for some of those comments. And so we'd love to interact with you. DM us if you have any questions, but we'll link some resources to the description for you guys. And man, we're just excited for what God is going to do in this season here as we talk through just different ways to connect with him, to connect with others. And so, hey, if you've been watching, thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe and like the video. And do not dislike it, please. But I think with all that being said, guys, we will see you next time. Adios. Peace out. Ciao. Cheers. See ya.
Whatever else.
Later. Wink, wink. You can't do that. That's a flag. That's a 15-yard penalty. You can't finger.